So we looked at the table that we have to go through in order to understand the segment structure. We'll continue from there and explore more about the ADT message type and the structure of the message. We'll explore each and every segment and touch base on most important fields that are part of the segment. Okay, let me share my screen. So before we jump on, any questions from anyone that you guys want to ask?
No question.
All right. Okay, so can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we understood what this table is, what are the columns that we have as part of this table, and we looked at each and every column. We looked at the values that may come up in a couple of columns like optionality, and wherever we have length as a constraint, you have to abide by that length parameter or length constraint that is given here. If there is 0, it means that you can have as many number of characters as you want. There is no restriction with respect to length there. And the last column is the additional need of this particular column. Wherever it is self-explanatory or just understandable, we'll quickly touch base that. But wherever there is an explanation needed, I will go ahead and explain the functional reasons and all behind it. That way, we'll complete all of these segments one by one: MSH, EVN, PID, PV1, GT1, and IN1. Once this is done, we will look at a ADTA0 for example, and then we will also understand from integration perspective, how do you export the data from the system and how do you import it, meaning the technical aspects of what process you follow to which is one of the most crucial points. What are the things that you keep in mind when you're importing a demographic related message? Usually the systems, what do they follow? With respect to demographics, you'll have a lot of scenarios: patient being registered at one location, patient being registered at multiple locations, or one big hospital having single EHR but having multiple PM systems, or one PM system but multiple EHR systems. How do they manage all of these things? So we'll touch base on few most famous workflows or scenarios so that we can understand from backend how these messages are managed to make sure that nothing goes wrong. So let's look at a message segment. A message segment is message segment header. So as I said yesterday, it is the index of a book. Similarly, it is index of the message. So a message segment will tell you where the message is coming from, who is sending it, who is going to receive it, at what time the message got generated, and what is the name of the message. All of these fields are present as part of the message segment. We also have a couple of fields representing acknowledgement. We'll talk about that as and when we progress. So MSH1 is field separator. Now let's go back to the example to understand MSH1 in a better manner. Yesterday and day before yesterday, I told you that let me pull out the HL7 message. Where is it? Yeah. So the other day when we were exploring about the structure of the HL7 message, I told you that whatever is held between two pipes is called as a field, right? And every field has its own field position. And that sequence would start from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. And if a field is broken down into components, every component has its own position, again, starting from 1. Now, only with MSH, there is one exception. Okay. Always there are exceptions in certain standards, right? In the same way, there is one single exception with respect to MSH segment field number 1. Apparently, if you are new what would you understand? What is the first field here? We would assume that whatever is held between two pipes is the first field, right? So we read it this way: first field, second field, third field, fourth field, and so on. That's how we tend to read, right? But as I said, there is just one exception. Only for a message segment, the pipe itself is called as a field. Okay. The first pipe itself is called as field, and then from there on, whatever is held between two pipes is called as read as subsequent fields. So when you read an HL7 message, and specifically the message segment, you would say this is field number 1, this is field number 2, this is field number 3, field number 4, 5, 6, and so on. Okay, that's the only catch here. That's the only difference. Okay, so even in specifications, when you see MSH1 says it's a field separator, which is nothing but the pipe itself. And even if you look at the tools like this, which would break down the HL7 message, if you go to a message segment, you can see that first field shows the field separator. Okay, just keep that in mind. Next, you have further, it is pretty much same as you read the rest of the HL7 messages. Second field, or second field is something that would have all the control characters or message delimiters, which we have seen in the first session. So these would determine and tell what is the structure of the HL7. I mean, what symbols are used within the HL7 message. Um, One of the trainee in the past asked me, can we change those symbols and use the symbols that we need? Of course, you can change it, but the entire standard in the healthcare industry uses these symbols. Okay, even HL7 organization says that if you want to change, you can go ahead and change, but you may have to develop the tools which would support your specific user-defined message delimiters. Okay, so that's one of the questions that came up. We can go ahead and have star in instead of caret symbol, and some other representation for tilde and so on. You can have it if you want to have it, but that's no crime. Uh, but you will become out of the box, right? If you want to implement an interface with someone else, most entire world will be following this, but you will be following some other value. Next, let us go to the third field. 3, 4, 5, 6 are most important fields. Uh, these fields represent the source of the message and the destination of the message. The way we look at a message, or the general HL7 messages, always there is a source and the destination. If you go to the roots of the principle, it says that an HL7 message comes into play only when there is a need for a transaction. If there is no need for a transaction, it doesn't get generated and sent anywhere, right? So two systems are always involved in generating or in transacting an HL7 message. There is a source system, there is a destination system. Source system or sending system, what we call as, will generate the HL7 message. Destination system or receiving system will go ahead and receive the HL7 message. Okay, so uh, 3, 4, 5, 6 elements, or 3, 4, 5, 6 fields are dedicated to transform or transfer this data, so that whoever receives the HL7 message or whoever looks at that HL7 message can understand who is sending it, who is receiving it. So 3, 4 represents sending application and sending receiving facility. Let's say that the data is being transacted within Apollo Hospital, and Apollo has two applications. One is PM system and the other one is EHR system. So here, when a demographic data is transacting between PM to EHR, the sending application will become PM, sending facility will become Apollo Hospitals, so and so location. And then you have receiving application, receiving facility. Receiving application is EHR application. Receiving facility is still Apollo because it is present within the same facility or same location. Okay, so those fields are important. Why do we use this in real-time implementations? In real-time implementations, when you generate or when you create an interface, uh, you do add these values. When vendor receives it, based on the message values, they may route the message to a specific destination. Okay, so there may be a scenario where they might be receiving messages for hundreds of EHR systems, for example. They have to make sure that they are sending the data to the correct EHR system. So in such cases, they will use MSH 3, 4, 5, 6 values for routing mechanism. This is one use case. We'll talk more about that down the line when we start Mirth Connect integration engine. There we are going to look at the interface patterns that we can build on Mirth Connect. So during that process, we'll talk more about routing. But apparently, these fields play important role. That's what I wanted to highlight here. Next, we have MSH7. MSH7 is generated date time, pretty much self-explanatory. It will have when exactly the HL7 message got generated, that specific date and time is sent here. Then you have a message 9, which is nothing but the message type, the name of the book, right? In the same way, a message 9 is the message type, which will let us know what kind of message we are looking at or what kind of message we are dealing with. Okay, and next we have message control ID, one of the most important fields again. Message control ID is a unique ID that is sent in the HL7 message. The purpose of sending this is used to identify each and every HL7 message uniquely. When you take any small clinic as well, and the number of transactions that would happen per day are more than 500,000, something like that. And if you go to big enterprise hospitals, the transactions would be like anything. There may be thousands and thousands of transactions for each day. Okay. So as we have so many transactions, at times we may want to pinpoint to one of the HL7 message and say that, can you check what data you received in this HL7 message? Or someone might ask us what data you have sent in this HL7 message. Can you confirm? Something like that. So when such kind of dialogue happens between two different people, how will they identify one message? One, with the help of patient name and all. What if the patient name, that particular patient has maybe 20, 25 transactions? We have to go through every transaction, right? So there is a great probability of looking at the wrong message if you do not have specifics about what message he is asking to look for, right? So that's where message control ID comes into play. Message control ID is the unique ID. It is uniquely assigned for each and every message that is being transacted between two different systems. Okay, so senders and receivers will use this as the reference, stating that, can you check the message with this message control ID, or can you give me a message with this message control ID so that I can verify? Okay, so that is used for that specific purpose. Next, you have MSH11 processing ID. So processing ID represents whether an HL7 message is a production related message, dev related message, development related message, or testing message. So you have three values that would go in MSH11. One is P representing production. Another one is D representing development message. And another one is T representing testing message. Okay. So this would help the vendors or the receivers to process only certain kind of message in their system. So at times there may be a probability where a testing message may be sent to production system, right? So in that case, the production system should reject the message. They shouldn't accept the message. So this particular value present in MSH11 would be helpful for that. Next, you have a message 12, which is version ID. So here we specify the HL7 exactly what version exactly we are using. That will be sent in a message 12. Next, we have a message 15 and 16, which is nothing but accept acknowledgement and application acknowledgement. So there are two different types of acknowledgements that we'll come across in HL7 implementations. We'll explore more about acknowledgement types in in the session where we talk about acknowledgement message structure. We'll take a look at the workflow uh, and all. There are various mechanisms that the receiving system follows in order to send out an acknowledgement. But for now, let us understand what is acknowledgement and let us understand what is the role of 15 and 16. That is enough for this particular segment's understanding. So what is an acknowledgement basically? Whenever we go to any supermarket or store, we buy some goods, and once that is done, we pay the amount, right? Once we pay the amount, you get a receipt or a counterfoil, right? And that would act as a proof of purchase. So that proof of purchase is necessary because you cannot leave the store without that proof of purchase, something like that. So that proof of purchase or that receipt is actually acting as a proof that you have paid the amount and a transaction has happened. In the same way, in the HL7 world, when an HL7 message is sent from one system to another, how would the sending system know, or how would someone else know that message got delivered successfully to the destination? Okay, so it is very crucial to know for the sending system, because if it doesn't know, then it will keep on sending the message, right? So that's where acknowledgement comes into play. Once a message is sent from sending system to the receiving system will interpret that message and send the data back or acknowledgement back to the source system or sending system. And once the sending system receives the acknowledgement back, it would determine that yes, the message got delivered successfully. Then it will send the next message. Okay, and this cycle goes on. Sending system sends the message, receiving system receives it, receiving system will go ahead and respond back to the source system or sending system with an acknowledgement message. Okay, then the sending system would send the next message. All right. So MSH 15 and 16 are the values which would dictate the destination on when exactly they need an acknowledgement. Okay, so let's look at the values that can go in MSH 15 and 16. Now these two fields are associated with two tables, right? Table 155, table 155. The other day I told you that if there is a table number, most probably there will be some sort of values within that table, and that table itself will tell us whether we have to use the data from that table only, or whether we can have our own table created with our own custom values. So let us look at the table first, and then we will understand these aspects. So if you click on this, it will take you to the table structure. So this is Characteristics website. This is a very good website which has a lot of versions, segment structures, and all. They have prepared everything from scratch using HL7 specification documents. So this is a tool which will come in handy a lot. So you guys can go ahead and use this as well. Let me share this in the chat. So the documentation that I prepared is from this open source specifications itself. So if you want to filter any trigger events, you can go to this trigger events. If you want to look at any segment structure, you can go to this structure. Now we are looking at the table structure. So table 155 is representing the fact that there are four values, and here at the top it says HL7 standard table. So if a table is an HL7 standard table, you are supposed to go ahead and use the values from that table only, which means you cannot customize, you cannot create new set of tables, or you cannot um, insert new values in this existing table. Okay, so it is very stringent. We are supposed to follow that rule, that if a table is HL7 standard table, we have to use the values from the table itself. Okay, and now when you look at the values here, it says AL, ER, NE, and SU. AL means always. So when you send always in a message 15 and 16, this is the way you're telling the destination system when you need the acknowledgement, right? So if you send AL in a message 15, for example, then you're saying that I would always need acknowledgement message from you. Then the destination system, when it receives the message, it will look at message 15 and 16, and it will see what value is there in message 15. If it says always, it will send the HL7 acknowledgement message always. Similarly, if you send as ER is error. So you are telling the destination system, you keep processing the messages on your side, and whenever there is any error, send me an acknowledgement with the error details. Okay, that is one scenario. Another scenario, never. Now you are sending any stating that I never want to go and receive an acknowledgement from you, and I'm not bothered about whether messages are received to you or not. I am sending it to you. It's your responsibility to take care of receiving them, processing them, and everything. Okay, something like that. So you send any in the source message, which is very rare case, very rare. I have never seen any in my entire career. Next, you have SU. SU is successful. So you're telling the destination system, send me the messages or send me the acknowledgements only when you successfully process the message. Then if it is an unsuccessful message, then don't send me the acknowledgement. What is the use of this one? So for all the successful messages, the sending system will receive the acknowledgement. If it is not receiving the acknowledgement back, it would deem or assume that the message did not get processed successfully on the destination side, and source system will determine and decide what has to be done with that message later. Okay, there may be some sort of manual process, or we may queue up the messages in the integration engine so that it can be sent later. So many things that we can do in such scenarios if you are receiving an error, if you're not receiving an acknowledgement, basically. Okay, so those are the important fields of a message segment. So let us jump on to the next segment. Before that, any questions from anyone regarding a message?
What is
Uh,
that R and O? I don't understand it. Option.
this field, right? Yeah, as I
Yes.
mentioned yesterday, this would tell you whether a field is required or not. Okay, so there are multiple values, R, O, C, W, W. These are the values that you will see in that field. If any field is represented as required, which means that any HL7 message that you're going to generate should have these fields for sure. You cannot ignore them. And if you have O as the value, it means that those are optional fields. Even if your HL7 message doesn't have these fields, that is okay. But wherever it is R, those fields, data in those fields should be there in any case.
Okay.
Any other questions from anyone?
Is this the standard format for creating an interface from our side?
Good question. Um, so creating an interface from our side depends on the specification document, which we are going to see in the future. Um, but pretty much the format would look like this only. The optionality might change. There may be additional constraints to length. Let's say, for example, the vendor might say that in a message 3456, you cannot have more than 20 characters or 25 characters. Okay, so there is a concept called profiling where they will pick up this base specification and create their own, uh, add their own rules to this specification. And usually implementations are done in that modified specification. But the structure would look same. They will give you the length, data type, optionality, repeatability, table data, everything will be provided by them, but it is a modified version of it. So that would be our reference for any real-time HL7 implementation.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions from anyone? All right. I'm not hearing anything. So let us jump on to the next subsequent messages. So next we have EVN segment. AVN segment represents the event of the HL7 message. So we are already sending the event data in a message 9.2. Same information is being sent here as well. So EVN1 represents event type code. EVN2 represents recorded date time. So when exactly this event got registered. And this data is also from message 7. Okay. Next, you have PID segment. So PID segment is patient identification segment used to identify a patient record. So we'll go ahead and look at all the important fields in this particular segment. There are around 40 fields in PID segment. So we'll touch base on most important fields. And as I told you earlier, we are not looking at one specific HL7 version type as we go through the course. I have highlighted all of these fields irrespective of the version. Okay, this document is representing the version of 2.7 documents or 2.7 specification, but I did not consider that while preparing this document. The fact that I am highlighting the fields which are from all the versions, not just from a specific version of HL7 message. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now, when you look at the PID segment, all the highlighted fields are frequently used fields in the HL7 message and also frequently talked about fields. So as an HL7 engineer or implementation analyst, you should be aware of or you should memorize few fields. Okay. I'll tell you what all segments are important at the end. Once we complete the HL7 part, I'll tell you what all segments you should learn for sure. But it is good to have knowledge about other segments and other fields as well. But few of the segments and fields are very, very important. Okay. So let's go through PID segment, PID 2, 3, and 4. So these three fields are used to go ahead and send patient identifiers. Now you may wonder, why do we have so many identifier fields? Can we not have just one? Yes, we can have only one. That was the intention. 2 and 4 were withdrawn from the specification in the higher versions. Okay, so you can see that 2 and 4 are withdrawn and 3 is required. If you look at the older versions of HL7, then you will have 2, 3, and 4, all three fields being used for representing or sending identifier data. Now let us go back to the functional reasons. Why do we have so many IDs? That's the first question that would hit our mind, right? So if you look at real-time implementations, if you go to a hospital, let's say you are going to a hospital and that hospital did not use um, software system to register patients for a very long time, for example, and they have acquired a system recently. But in order to identify patients before acquiring the system, they may be generating their own internal identifiers for each and every patient, which we call as MRN number, medical record number. Okay. So using that MRN number, they will be able to identify the patient uniquely throughout their entire hospital database, or basically entire their hospital records. Now that they have acquired a new system, a software system, they start registering the patients in that software system. And when they register there, that would generate a new identifier. The system itself would generate a new identifier. So oftentimes what happens is whenever anyone is acquiring a new system, they would also say that we need additional fields to store the old identifiers as well, so that we can search for patient based on those old identifiers too. Okay, so to satisfy such kind of needs, there will be additional provision given in the applications to store more than one identifier. So one identifier generated by the system, one identifier which was generated locally by themselves within the hospital premises. Okay, here we did end up in two different IDs, right? Let's say that this hospital is interacting with another hospital or another branch, and whenever a patient would get registered there in the another branch, the ADT message would flow over to this branch as well. So we are importing a demographic data into the PM system. That P message which is going to come in may have different patient ID. So that's the third ID. So in this way, we may end up in having multiple identifiers in the real-time implementations. Okay. To satisfy that need, we are seeing that we have PID 2, 3, and 4. That's where it started. In 2.3, you will see PID 2, 3, and 4 being used as 3 different identifiers. Okay. But later on, as when we progressed into the future, it's not just 2 IDs, 3 IDs. The number was high. There is no limit on whether you can have 3 IDs, whether you can have 10 IDs, whether you can have 15 IDs. There are functional reasons behind why a single person might have so many number of identifiers. Okay, we looked at a couple of them. Let's say that patient is visiting 10 branches of hospital and each branch has their own identifier. Okay, then we may end up in having 10 identifiers for one single patient. Right? Where do we send those 10 identifiers? We don't have field. We don't have placeholders for that. Right? That is when the single field value has been converted to a multi-field value. Okay, let's look at that. What do I mean by multiple values in single field? So 2 and 4 are deprecated, which means we are not using that anymore. Uh, that's the reason you are seeing W there, which represents withdrawn. And what they did is they made 3 as a repeatable field. And that's where this column comes into play. You see the star there. Star represents that this field is repeatable. Okay, what do I mean by that? So let's take the very same scenario which we are talking right now. So local ID of the patient, maybe ABC, this is the number, system generated patient ID. Let's say this is another ID. And then you have external ID coming from another application. Okay. IDs can be anything. It can be just the number. It can be an alphanumeric value, or it can be anything. Depends on system that you're dealing with, depends on hospital, depends on various aspects, how you want to have the ID. Okay. So let's say we have these 3 identifiers for one single patient now. Now, this is there in the PM system. So PM application has it. Now, when this patient gets registered or when patient's data gets updated, we have to make sure that all the 3 identifiers are sent in the HL7 message. So if it was older version of HL7 message, what you used to do, which is nothing but if it is PID3 version of HL7 message, you will send this one in this field, PID2, patient ID generated by system in PID3, and the external ID in PID4. Okay, so we have used one field each. Let's say that there is external ID from another system as well. Or let's say we will include some other identifier like, okay, let's say external ID itself. I don't want to complicate with some other national identifiers right now. So let's say we have external ID 2. Now, where can we send this ID? We don't have any placeholder. 2, 3, and 4 are already captured and used by the system. So that's where the HL7 spec has decided that we won't be using 2 and 4 anymore. We'll use one single field, PID3, and we'll send all the IDs in PID3. How can they send all the IDs? Let's take a look at that. So that's where this symbol comes into play. We see this symbol, right? This is called tilde, inverted S, which is called as tilde. On your keyboard, it will be just below the escape button. And using the tilde, you can separate the field and say that this data is a repeated data. Okay, what do I mean by that? You will have all the identifiers in the same field separated by tilde. Okay, now all the identifiers are sent in PID3 itself, and you can send as many number of repetitions as you want. So here PID3 is being repeated 4 times. You can have any number of repetitions. So now this gives the flexibility to add as many number of identifiers as you want. So there is, if the current workflow or environment of the hospital has 10 identifiers for the patient, they can send all the 10 IDs in one single field. So a lot of flexibility is added, a lot of options we can use with the help of this repetition process. Okay, case. Would you say this entire field as PID3? If you say entire field as PID3, then how do I read out one single data element from that entire PID3? Right? So again, there is a process on how do you read fields with specific repetitions. So let's go ahead and see. So whenever you see any field having repetitions, you will see that this is PID3. Whatever is present after tilde is also PID3. This is also PID3. This is also PID3. Okay. So this is called PID3 repetition number 1. This is called PID3 repetition number 2. Repetition 3, repetition 4. Okay, because we are repeating the same data, we cannot call the entire field as PID3. We call each one as, we identify, not call, we identify each entity in the repetition as separate PID3 field, and we interpret it that way. In case if this particular field has indications, this is MRN number, this is sys ID, this is external ID, this is external ID 2. So in general scenario, if you have it like this, let me cut it out for now. So if you have a field, you will say PID 3, 3.1 first component, right? And PID 3.2 is blank, 3.3 is blank, 3.4 is representing what kind of ID we have in the PID3. So it is saying that this ID is a medical record number. Okay. Now when you have repetitions added, then you would say PID3 repetition, PID 3.1 in repetition number 1 is MRN number. Okay. And if you want to read this HL7 message, you would say PID.3.1 is the ID. PID.3.4 tells us what kind of ID it is. Okay. So we can see that we have so many number of repetitions. So this is repetition number 1. Even in repetition 2, repetition 3, repetition 4, all that you will follow is the same notion. You would say this as, this is PID 3.1, this is PID 3.1, this is PID 3.1. Okay. You would identify each repetition as a separate entity of PID3. Okay. Just for your understanding, what I would do is just assume that there is a virtual pipe here whenever you are adding PID3, and each of them are identified as separate PID3 elements. Okay. So that's how you add multiple data elements of same kind within the same field as a repetition. That's all. Okay. So next, let us take a look at patient name. So any questions with respect to repetition before we jump on?
Dixon, apart from this tilde,
Mm-hmm.
we can see patient ID and between MRN, those fields, right? Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. So if at all we remove those things, will
Mhm.
in our HL7 message reading.
I missed your question. Will we? What did you say?
If there are multiple IDs for the patient from
Uh-huh.
the different, it's like a duplicacy happened in legacy system and all.
Right.
So now we are trying to, mention all those MRN all together in a one single message in the same. Uh,
Right.
so my question is, first we had mentioned the MRN number there, and
Right.
later it will be differentiated with the other MRN number with the tilde.
Correct.
So the thing which I had mentioned before, I really
Carrot.
what is the character actually?
Carrot. Carrot. CARET. Carrot. So we call it
CART
as
carrot.
carrot. Right. Correct.
Yeah, yeah. This carrot, if we are removing that carrot, will this affect in reading this particular message? I'm
It
just
would.
asking.
It would. Because here you are breaking down this HL7 field PID3 into multiple components. So
Okay.
this is component number one, dedicated for storing the ID. This is component number two, component number three. Component number four is dedicated to tell you what kind of ID it is.
Oh, okay. Okay, okay. So it is a by default it is a standard thing.
Yes, PID 3.4 represents the assigning authority, who assigned that ID and what ID it is.
Okay, okay. Fine, fine.
Okay, so these are essential elements which will help you in interpreting and reading the message. So those are important.
Okay,
It's just that you are mirroring the same structure for rest of the fields with the
okay.
help of a repetition. That's all.
Okay, so it has to be mentioned after each and every alternate ID which we are mentioning further.
Not necessary. It's not a required component, but people tend to follow when they have multiple identifiers, so they don't get confused. What ID
Okay,
this system is coming from? What ID this particular ID is? What system so and so
okay,
identifier is coming from? So just to be clear, people do use PID 3.4.
okay, okay. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions from anyone? All right. The repetition part becomes a little more clear as and when we progress with other repetitive fields. We'll talk down the line. Uh, so next we have patient name. So patient name, pretty much self-explanatory. You have the name of the patient in PID 5. Then you have date of birth in PID 7. Then you have PID 8 as gender. So let's look at this table. So if you go to gender, it is associated with a table, right? And if you go to the table, it says it is a user defined table. Now earlier when we have looked at the acknowledgement table, there it said it is HL7 standard table. So there are two kinds of tables. One is HL7 standard table, another one is user defined table. If HL7 message table says that it is a HL7 standard table, then you are supposed to go ahead and use only the values from that table. So it is a compulsion. You are supposed to go ahead and use only those values. But if you see a table which says it is an HL7, it is a user defined table, then it is up to you whether you want to use the values proposed by HL7 table or whether you want to use uh, values that you want to define on your own. So it is up to you. There is no restriction that you have to go ahead and use the table provided by HL7. At times HL7 says that it is a user defined table but doesn't give any values as well. Okay, so in user defined table scenario, here you can see that it says table with data suggested by HL7 organization. But if you want to represent these values, one female, two male, three not applicable, four other, five as unknown, you can create that table and you can use it for your implementation. Okay, so that's the reason it says user defined table. So tables, you have to see the actual table to understand what kind of table it is. So it's the race value in PID 10 is using this table. It is also again a user defined table. You can create your own values again. If you look at language, let's see if we have language table. So yeah, this is another example. Now, when you go to PID 15, you can see that there is a table associated, which means this field will pick up the data or will be populated from list of values present in a table, but that table is not suggested. There are no suggested values for this table by HL7. You can go ahead and create your own table. If HL7 is suggesting like this in terms of race and gender values, you can use them if you want to, or else you can create your own. Okay, so next let's take a look at, so we jump down to PID 15 from 10. Let's look at the fields intermediate. We have PID 11, which is patient's address. So this patient address would include patient, the street information, zip code, state, country information, city, everything will be there in PID 11. Okay, next you look at PID 13, which is nothing but phone number. So we have phone number as star, which means it is a repeatable value, which means if patient has multiple phone numbers, let's look at that field. So this is PID 13. Okay, so if patient has multiple phone numbers, then each phone number is separated with the help of tilde. This is okay. This is another phone number. This is another phone number. So patient has 3 different phone numbers. All the phone numbers are sent in as repetitions in PID 13. Okay, that's how you use repetitions. If certain data element is repeatable, we'll just add tilde there and add the additional repetitions or additional data of same kind in the field. Okay, but can you add repetitions anywhere? No, you have to look at the specification. If your specification allows, then you can go ahead and add it, or else you cannot add it. If your specification has only one repetition, you cannot go ahead and have a repetition there. Here for PID 13, we have that flexibility, so we are using the repeated values. Okay, then we have marital status. Then you have SSN number of the patient. Then you have ethnic group. Yeah, we'll look at all of these fields tomorrow. We'll continue taking a look at that. I'll open up for questions. If anyone has any questions, we can discuss about those questions.
Will you share this PPT with us?
Yes, it will be uploaded to Drive. There will be a zip folder called as training documents. And within those training documents, you will have all the material that we are going to use throughout this training.
Hello,
Okay.
Dixon.
Yeah, Sagar,
Yeah, in option value, what is the B?
I'll tell you. Let me complete previous question.
Yeah,
So, where was I? Okay, yeah, training documents. So I'll be uploading the training documents to Drive. And once I upload that, you can go ahead and take a look at whoever has download them. You can download them. You can look at all the documents and all. Important thing is I am sending all the documents at once. My request is don't look ahead. If you look ahead, you may come up with questions that I may answer in the future sessions or in the upcoming topic on the same day. Okay, so just go through the documents once we are done with it. Okay, that's the only request that I have. So, but I will be sending all the material. The training documents zip folder will have everything, sample messages, these documents, PPTs that we are looking at, and the sample EHR database, everything will be there.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, Sagar. So to answer your question, this field represents the optionality of certain field. So R is required, O is optional. Yesterday we looked at the other values as well, which is nothing but B. B represents backward compatibility, which means this field is going to be deprecated in the future versions. So whenever they decide that we don't want to use a certain field, they will first set it to B, which is nothing but backward compatible. And in the future sessions, after two versions of HL7 message, that particular field will be marked as W, which means withdrawn. So they will not be using that field anymore. So just to represent that this may go away in future versions, they will set it as B, implementing backward compatible. Okay, is that clear?
Yeah, sir.
All right. Any other questions from anyone? Yes, Sandhya.
So, why are we using 3 carets to separate the ID and the
Good
MRN?
question. Good question. So in the first session or second session, I don't remember. I think in second session I told you that the structure of a segment or structure of a field depends on the data type associated with that particular field. Okay. And this data type would tell you what is the number of components that that particular field can support. Okay, I'll remove this for now to remove the confusion. So PID3 has a dedicated data type where it would say clearly, if you look at the data type structure, we did not look at data types, so I won't go deep into it. But data type is the one which would tell you one should be the ID and four should be the data which represents what kind of ID it is. Okay. Between 3, 4, so this is 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, they have their own descriptions. There is a specific need for that. If you look at the specification, when we go through data types, we'll touch base on that. What does PID 3 dot, basically this data type, what is dot 1, what is dot 2, what is dot 3, we'll take a look at that.
Okay, so when you're saying dot 1, it's the ID, right? The ABC 741258.
Correct. This
And
is
2 is 1
2
caret next to that.
2 is blank right now. You don't have anything there.
No, I mean 3 point, 3.2 and 3.3.
Correct. They are blank right now. You don't have any data there. If you have any data, you would have something like this.
Okay. Got you. Yeah, I understood. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, other question was, so we can include commas in the address.
Yes, you can.
Okay. So why are we not using caret as a separator? Why are we using
if the
comma?
data type says, so here I mean, this is just a made up HL7 message. That's the reason you may not be looking at seeing the exact representation. But if you look at the data type of this particular field, it will tell you, okay, let me do this. The data type for this would say street line should be present in first component, and then you will have address in or city in one component, zip code in one component, country in one component, and so on.
Yeah.
That is how it would look like.
Okay.
Okay, but the data type dictates that. Data type will tell you which component should have city, which component should have state, which component should have country. So it is, you have to refer back to the data type associated with this particular field.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
No, and also with the phone number, do we have to add the brackets, or is that okay if you just put the numbers? Like I
Uh,
see that,
yes.
yeah, good.
HL7 specification doesn't say anything. It just says first field is for first component is for phone number. You can have brackets and hyphens if you want to. It's okay even if you don't want to have it.
Okay.
So this is something that is informed to you by real-time implementation specification documents. Few may be using this format, few may be using this format. So
Yeah.
you have to refer to that modified version of your HL7 spec, which is provided to you by your implementer or whoever is going to by your vendor. They will tell you what format they want to use. So you have to just follow that.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Yep. You're welcome. All right. Any other questions from anyone?
This one,
Yeah.
uh, just we use Tinda in the phone number
Mm-hmm.
to different phone number. We can use in local ID and system ID. We can use a Tinda or Carrot.
Where in the phone number session, phone number field?
Yeah, we use Tinda in the phone number system to define a different phone number.
Correct.
And can we use in system ID to define the different system?
System ID in the sense this one?
Yeah. We can use here also Tinda to define the different system IDs.
Yes, you can do that. That's what we looked at as an example, right? So we looked at, see, these are different IDs, right? So we have
Yeah.
put up the different IDs separating tilde only,
Oh,
right?
okay.
This is what we did earlier.
Yeah. We can use Carrot also and Tinda also to define.
No. You cannot use caret in a repetitive in scenario of a repetition.
Yeah.
So to differentiate two different fields, we use only tilde. Caret is used to differentiate the components within a field.
Okay.
Okay, so this one is an entire field, and within that field, if you are breaking down into components, then you will use carets, or else we won't use carets.
Okay.
If you have repeated data, so this is one data set, this is one data set, this is one data set or data element, right? So as it is being repeated, you are using tilde.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions from anyone? Okay, I'm not hearing anything. So let us conclude today's session. We'll continue tomorrow. And if you're planning to join from tomorrow, please get enrolled. Reach out to Srinivas and he will go ahead and share his phone number in the chat. You can go ahead and reach out to him and get enrolled. Okay. Thank you, everyone. You all have a very good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.